I just wanted to do a quick tour of some of the things that are ripening right now and some of the flowers that are blooming and just stuff going on in both the backyard orchard here and then the actual orchard out there with all the figs. Lots of stuff is going on this time of year and it gets busy, and I don't usually get time to show the stuff off too much, so I just wanted to show a couple different things that are going on. This bush here filled with fruit is a Nanking cherry. The fruit tends to cling closer to the plant than the other cherries, so sometimes the birds miss a lot more than they would on a normal cherry tree where they can kind of pick things off. It's definitely a tart cherry, but one I like to grow. This one here, it's about, I would say about 8 feet tall. And I think I planted this one in this spot about 2 years ago. So it's a quick grower, nice bushy plant. I can zoom out a little bit there. This interesting cluster of fruits here is on one of my white Nanking cherries. They grow very similarly and produces clusters of these cool looking white fruit. Move some of the leaves aside. The leaves are given a more of a green tint, but they are white and a little bit less tart than the other Nanking cherries, the red ones. It's still really interesting. This branch here is very productive this year. The Montmorency cherry is just about done for the year. This is a pretty big plant, but it gets picked over pretty well by birds, and then my kids, and then myself. And this year it didn't produce as many fruit as previous years, but still did pretty well. The Montmorency is that one right in the middle there, and it has been in ground maybe 4 or 5 years now. It's a nice big plant, and I prune it like crazy every year, and it's still huge. And that's a sour cherry. These are some of my Methely plums, and they will start ripening maybe in a couple weeks to a month, somewhere around then. And Methely plums are purple and extremely juicy, really dark interior purple when they ripen, and just unbelievably juicy. So I'm a big fan of this variety too. I have some Shiro plums in here also, which is a yellow plum, and this variety hasn't been as productive for me yet, but it has been vigorous growing. This one down here, which I'm holding up because it's a Mariana rootstock. I grafted that 3 years ago, and that's what it looks like at the base. That's right above the graft point, but it is a big tree. And it dropped most of its fruit this year. This was the first time fruiting the one in ground. I have the same plant grafted the same time in a pot, and that one started fruiting a little bit earlier, so I've had a couple fruit off it already. And it's a really interesting yellow plum. But my Methely plum is about a year older, but has been more productive for me so far. But I get the feeling that once this Shiro plum starts going, it's going to be extremely fruitful. I always look forward to these Methely plums. Incredibly juicy, and it's probably my most productive plum tree. I didn't do a ton of plum grafts this year, but I did this one onto my Shiro Plum, which was grafted onto a rootstock. And the green Gage graft has done really well and looks like it will be fine. And I'll probably thin out some more of the Shiro branches around it to sort of give the green Gage graft a little more prominence. And hopefully that sticks around. Here's a few breba on my Olympian fig tree. And Olympian's breba get very large, usually all in the 100-gram range. And that's one other interesting thing about it as a variety. Not a lot of varieties will produce more than a few Breba per tree. Olympian is one of the few that will, and they are large Breba. And they're good too. They always have like a peach, like a light peach flavor to me that I really like. And this tree here didn't really take any dieback in the winter, and that's always a good thing. A lot of my yard took some dieback, and the Olympian did not. Most of the stuff that's a little older in my yard didn't take any dieback this year. Most of the areas that took dieback were in open sun, and mostly on plants that were a year old, a year or two or younger. This is one of my bee balm flowers. It's a pretty plant with a really nice looking flower on it. It's kind of alien, but the bees like it. I love the color of the blooms on these hydrangeas. This bigleaf hydrangea was our wedding flower a long time ago, more than 20 years ago now. So I got one after our wedding and planted it here, and so far all these other ones have been made from cuttings of that original plant I got. This was probably the second one I put in ground, and this one is nice and wide. It's about 10 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Just a really fun plant that just gets covered in huge, fluffy blue blooms. The hydrangeas really like a lot of water. They're nice to get in ground because they tolerate a little bit less water in ground, but they still need a lot of water. And a blueberry right in front of it. This blueberry is actually one I did from cutting a couple years ago. So it's already fruiting a couple years later. Got it right in front of this hydrangea. This is a bigleaf hydrangea. And I have big leaf hydrangeas. I also have panicle hydrangeas, which behave completely differently. And the big leaf hydrangeas are blooming now. The panicle hydrangeas are just starting to put their flower clusters out. And these ones here have slightly acidic soil. Our soil here is a little bit acidic, and that's why they're turning out blue. If I were to, which I've done before, plant the same plant or a cutting from this plant in a container that has a more neutral pH, they turn out a little purplish. And if it has a little bit more of an alkaline soil, they turn out with pink flowers. This is what I mean right here. This is actually reproduced from that same plant that I was just showing you that was all blue. So I have two here in different containers. One is mostly ground soil and in contact with the ground, and that one is blue. And this pink one is in a container with a soil pH around 7. So very interesting plants, and they produce different color blooms in different situations. In a small 1 gallon pot. It's one of the ones I currently have for sale. But they have pretty flowers, and then if you put them in acidic soil, next time it blooms, it'll bloom bright blue like my other one. And if it's in more alkaline soil, it'll bloom more pink than this. This sprawling plant that's spilling all over its container here onto the ground is a weeping mulberry called a Pendula Mulberry. It has a very interesting habit of just falling down from wherever it's growing and spilling over. This one actually is running all the way on the grass here. And it, even though it's more of a plant for interest because of what it does, it also still fruits, and it's just at the end of its fruiting right now. That one just fell off there. We got most of these fruit already, but there's still a few that haven't ripened yet in here. I've had a couple grafts of this guy. Interesting leaf pattern too. This one here with a cage around the lower part of it is one of my Morus Nigras. And I have a few different Morus Nigra trees, and the ones grafted onto vigorous Morus alba rootstock actually grow pretty well. I know that it's known to be a plant that does not grow well, and that is a slow grower, even though it's supposed to have the best tasting mulberries around. But my ones grafted onto vigorous in-ground Morus albas are actually doing well. And this one this year has fruit on it, and then I have another graft on the other side of the yard that has fruit on it already. And these are about 2 or 3 years old. You get a little idea what the leaf looks like on Morus Nigra. And about 90% of the mulberries you see labeled in nurseries are labeled Morus Nigra, but they are not. It's just a miscommunication about the word Nigra in Spanish means black. So nurseries assume every black colored mulberry is a Morus Nigra, when that's not true at all. In fact, almost none of the ones you see in the nurseries, very close to none of them, 90+% of them, are Morus albra. And this is an actual Morus Nigra. There are a couple different varieties of Morus Nigra. Let me zoom in on the tag here. This one is a Persian Morus Nigra. And it's about 3 years old, this graft. I grow a Persian Morus Nigra, and then I grow a Persian Dwarf Everbearing. The Persian Dwarf Everbearing is totally different, and that is a Morus alba. And it has small fruit. The Morus Nigra is just a different plant altogether. And this one here has actually withstood pretty cold temperatures. We get down to about 5 degrees in the winter. And this one here has survived that. So that's much more cold hardy than I was ever told that they were. I've seen reports that they're tolerant down to about 15 or 20 or 25 degrees, but at least in my case, I haven't seen that. I've seen all of these Morus Nigra be tolerant of 5 degrees. This one over here is one of my older grafted mulberries. And I think most of these grafts are 3 years old. No, actually they're only 2 years old, which is kind of crazy with how thick they are. I have enormous hands, but that's the graft point. And this is a Morus Nigra here. This is Black Beauty Morus Nigra, a little over 2 years old. And you can see it already has fruit on it. And the fruit on Morus Nigra looks totally different than on Morus alba and Morus rubra. And it's not supposed to be vigorous, but because this is the top of the tree, this one is extremely vigorous. It's growing like crazy. This one up here is a Persian Morus Nigra. It's a different graft, and it's actually already busting out of the tag. But if you get a vigorous Morus alba tree and you cut most of it off, it has to put the energy somewhere. So sometimes it goes right into the grass. This one here, which is all dangling down here, is another one of that Pendula Mulberry I have, which is kind of cool because it likes to hang down. And it's really cool while producing a bunch of fruit. And then this one over here came to me labeled as Illinois Everbearing, but I suspect I have another Illinois Everbearing that I think is correct. And this one, to me, with the conical shape of the berry, I don't think this is Illinois Everbearing, or it's just one of those ones where there's multiple different Illinois Everbearings floating around. So this one I haven't really done much with. But yeah, I'm really excited about these 2 Morus Nigra grafts here. Finally producing fruit after just 2 years. And they're huge. Try not to get poison ivy on me. But they are enormous. And they're almost as thick as my wrist already. This is one of my Everbearing mulberries. Let me check the tag here. This is the Persian Dwarf. And I mostly grow Persian Dwarf and Jan's Best. And they're pretty similar. They do have their differences though. All of the Everbearing mulberries have a bit smaller of a berry. They're pretty heavy producers of smaller berries. And the plant doesn't grow as vigorously. The leaves are usually much smaller. They have more of the Morus alba leaf, and they're much smaller than some of the other varieties. This one right next to it is a maple leaf mulberry. Which is a kind of an interesting maple leaf shape. And then right next to that I have a Pakistan mulberry, which has a totally different leaf shape. This mulberry here is El Dorado, and it's one of my more productive white mulberries. I had a whole bunch of really nice ripe berries on it, But I waited a little too long because I came out here about an hour ago and there was a squirrel and the tree was shaking like crazy. He got almost all of them. But there's still some left. But they can be really big, juicy white mulberries. I'll pick that one right there. Oh, it's not really ready. It's not ready because the squirrel got all the ones that were ready. Happens sometimes. This one here is a Jan's Best, and it's in a large 10 or 15 gallon pot, and it's been a pretty heavy producer for me too. Get in here in some of the clusters. Lots of berries. I think I prefer Jan's Best to Persian Dwarf Everbearing, but it's really close, and sometimes it switches from year to year. But this is a nice productive berry. And I love the taste of any of these dark mulberries, basically. The light ones are good too, but the dark ones are probably my favorite. Lots of great berries on this guy, and they're clustered in towards the stem. But lots of fruit for a small tree. This one here is about my height. So it's a little bit under 6 feet tall, something like that. And this one, both of these Everbearings, the Persian Dwarf and Jan's Best, I really like that you can propagate these from cuttings. Not all mulberries are easy to propagate by cutting on their own roots. Probably around half the varieties I have to graft to make it work onto rootstock, but the Everbearing ones you can do from cutting, which is nice. This one is my Black Prince Mulberry, and I have this one grafted onto a Morus alba seedling that grew out of the ground. It's probably 3 or 4 years old, and it's held up really well. It has the leaf shape and texture, a little bit of Morus rubra, but mostly Morus alba with the shiny leaves. That's one way to distinguish Morus alba, is the shiny leaf here. And it's grown really well for me in a mostly shaded environment. It still does a good job producing berries, and I really like the berries on Black Prince. They can get bigger than average, and these ones here are nice and ripe. The ants like them too, so I just blow on them. This is a voiceover right now, so you don't hear me blowing on it, but they're really interesting berries. They have a kind of a purplish tinge to them at all times, although they can still get pretty dark. And the interesting part of them is also the interior. When you bite one of them in half, they have this really kind of light pink to white coloration on the inside. Definitely a mulberry variety that I really like, and this one does well even though it's in shade here, and it's been in ground for 4 years with no real dieback. This tree here is my Oscar Mulberry, and it's 4 or 5 years old in ground here. Doesn't really take much dieback at all. Holds up really well to the weather, and this one's also in a pretty shaded location, but still doing well. It's not as productive as a few of the other varieties, but as far as taste goes, Oscar may be my favorite tasting mulberry. It just has a flavor that I really like. It's a pretty mellow flavor with good sweetness and some berry complexity, and has always been on my list as one of my favorites. And it's a pretty big tree here. I think it's about maybe 14 feet tall, 12, 14 feet tall, and just an excellent variety that I would recommend to just about anybody. It's another one like Shangri-La that can be rooted from cuttings, and it does really well in ground for us. It has an interesting leaf pattern too, and in the fall they get in like a unique sort of yellow coloration around the outside of the leaves as they go dormant. That looks interesting too. But one of my favorite mulberry varieties. This tree here shows off something I really like to do, which is graft mulberries. And this one here was a decent size in-ground mulberry seedling. It just sprouted up on its own. Bird dropped it from a seed, and I cut off 5 branches and grafted 5 different mulberry varieties onto it. You can see they have different leaf patterns. This top one here was from a friend named Derek in West Virginia, and it's called Sweet Virginia. It's a variety that he found. And then I've got White Pakistan on here. What else is there? That's White Pakistan. And I've got Maple Leaf, which has also an interesting leaf pattern. This is Maple Leaf. And they all have different types of berries. I did have one of the grafts, which was doing well, is right there, and it broke off. And that's pretty common with these because the squirrels will climb on them, birds will land on them. So that's why I put a cage around this one. I try to keep a cage around it until it's a certain age. And then I will take the cage off and let them on their own. But right now these grafts are only a couple months old and they're about 30 inches tall. So once the graft really takes, it can grow really quickly. These are just a few more mulberry grafts. I do a few mulberry grafts each year, and these ones are in containers. And some of them I dig the Morus alba or white mulberry seedlings up when I find them in ground and put them in a small pot and then graft onto them to either sell or for myself to put in a different location. And sometimes I graft them to in-ground trees just to get some of these going in different situations. Most of the mulberry varieties do take pretty well, but I'll do a separate video on mulberry grafting and some more of my mulberries. These are a few of my older Anna hardy kiwis, and they always do well and grow like crazy. And then every month or two I cut them back so they're not on the ground anymore, and so that there's not too many of the long growths, because they can get really big. They can get to be, 5-6 feet long of long growth, and I cut that off, shorten it, thin it out, give it a little more air circulation. My male hardy kiwis didn't produce as many flowers this year. They just had a few, but it was good enough to pollinate this Anna hardy kiwi so that it will have a couple hundred fruit. But believe it or not, it could have done better. It could have been thousands. There were so many flowers on this guy and a lot of them dropped off. There's still a lot here, so I'm not upset. But if the male did even better this year, all of my vines would look like this. Now this is the vine that is closest to the male vine that was producing this year, but I swear it only had 10 flowers on the male vine. It was an off year for it. So we still got plenty of kiwis, but it could have been better. I'm in my area of plants that I have for sale right now. Most of these are listed on my website. Some I haven't listed yet, and I will soon. There's even a Black Celeste here, which I haven't gotten a chance to list yet, but will eventually. I just wanted to show this off because it's right next to this cherry cordial, which is absolutely ridiculous. Cherry cordial is the most vigorous growing fig. It grows so quickly, it gets big leaves. It's a very thirsty plant. You need to keep giving it water. But compared to some of these other ones, it's just enormous. That's a normal one, and that's a cherry cordial. I removed quite a bit of the stuff in the greenhouse because of some of the heat we've been getting. When it's in the 90s, I either put up shade cloth or I move stuff outside for a bit. But there's still some more stuff left in here. The greenhouse does a great job of making sure that I can water stuff at the pace I want to water it. When it's out of the greenhouse, if we get an inch of rain, it can really mess up some small rooting plants. But the greenhouse does a good job of protecting them so I can water them how I want to water them. Because it doesn't really need the heat this time of year. In fact, the heat in the greenhouse can be too much, so I have the door and the window open and the fan on full blast. But the greenhouse still is a good area to keep them protected from rain. This is just a quick glimpse of the outside of my work area and greenhouse. Helps me get a head start on the season and helps me start hundreds of plants. This is actually one of my variegated Martinenca ramata plants. I grew this of a cutting off of my main variegated Martinenca ramata this year, and some of the cuttings grew vigorously and had no variegation, and a few of them had some variegation like this guy. And this is the way this one seems to go. It's either a regular dark green leaf, a paler leaf, which gets sunburned a lot more easily than other things. Or my favorite is the ones that are some combination of the pale leaf or the white leaf and the dark green. And I actually added another variegated plant this year. I'm trying out Jolly Tiger. And like most variegated plants, I try not to put them in too much sun, because if you just stick this one out in the middle of the orchard in the hot sun, the pretty variegated leaves crispy up pretty quickly. Here, let me give you an example of what happens to them. The nice variegated part of the leaf just burns off. And that's why we grow them, so that they have that beautiful variegation there. And this is actually the main tree that the variegated Martinique aromatas came off of. And it's doing something weird too. It's more putting out yellow leaves or green leaves. I haven't seen a lot of the really cool variegation on this one this year. Except for that little spot at the base, which has it. It's always interesting. Got some pineapple guavas going here in pots. I upgraded them to about 10-gallon pots this year. And this one got a late start. I kept it in the greenhouse in the winter, and it got a really late start doing anything, so we'll see if it flowers. It flowered for me last year, and I have 3 different ones over here. Coolidge and Mammoth, and I don't know what the third one is. But we'll see how they do. I would love to put one of these in ground eventually. I just fear that it would die if it got below 10 degrees, which is probably the case. But I'll probably try it eventually. The blueberries are still producing tons of fruit. They're in the early stages for the year. And we've gotten buckets of blueberries already off of these guys. But there's a lot left to go. So many blueberries. Definitely one of my favorite fruits in the garden. And it's a funny one because I don't really like store-bought blueberries anymore. The tree ones, the fresh from the garden ones, have really ruined it for me. When they're warm from the sun instead of cold from the refrigerator, I don't know why they taste so much better. The sugar is better in them. They're more sweet than tart. And I find the store-bought ones to be kind of tart. So I mostly eat them during blueberry season. And it's probably the fruit tree that got me into growing fruit. This plant here is probably 18 or 19 years old. And when I first got it, I didn't think much of it, but just let it grow here for a long time. And then it just started producing buckets of blueberries, and that really got me interested in what else will grow without a lot of effort and will be better each year and come back better each year. So it's one of the reasons I love perennial fruit growing. This blueberry here isn't as productive as it could be, but it's doing a great job for a plant that a tree fell on last year. The tree had smashed it all the way to the ground, and I cut the tree up. The tree was a couple thousand pounds. I cut it up and got it off it, and most of the plant survived. I cut off maybe a third of the blueberry bush, and the rest of it survived and is doing well. And this is right where I put the greenhouse addition. My double gold raspberries are just in the early stages of starting to fruit this year. Just the first couple are starting to ripen. And I like this variety a lot. It has like a goldeny, pinkish color when it ripens. And it's a lighter flavored raspberry, I would describe it as. And it fruits in the early summer for me, from now and for the next month, and then it fruits again in the fall. This one here is a bit of a mess because I have not gotten the chance to prune it this year. I usually do a little cleanup pruning in the fall. And I love raspberries, but my only warning is don't plant them somewhere you don't want them to spread. Because raspberries, you plant 2 raspberries and it creates quite a bit of raspberries. So it's not one you need to buy 15 of, but they're also a really cool plant. This is my grape graft project that I did onto the, I think it was a pigeon grape, like a wild grape in the yard. And I did a little video on this before, but this is all one graft of the Mars grape I did a little while ago. And it's got lots of grapes on it that are developing. There's some of the grapes. And it's very healthy. And this is the graft point right here, believe it or not. It's healed over really well. And it actually bridge grafted itself back to another piece that it was resting on because I cut it there too. So it's kind of got 2 points that are feeding it. But it's a really thick old vine. And it's an interesting one. Right next to another one of my hardy kiwis. And then I have some of my persimmon grafts down here. I haven't done much with these yet. I've got to either put some of them in ground or sell them or up pot them. But this one is an early golden. There's a couple other ones over here. And the early golden is already starting to fruit. Started to put out some persimmon flowers here. The blackberries are doing great as usual. They're probably the easiest to grow of all of the perennial fruiting plants. Just kind of plant them and wait it out. And they do their thing. The squirrels do love blackberries though. But yeah, this was a blackberry vine that I just planted maybe a year or two ago. And it's huge and covered in berries. This is an example of what some of my blackberries can do in full sun. There are just hundreds and hundreds of blackberries, and that was one plant that was in the shade last year, producing maybe 20 or 30 blackberries in full shade, and then planted it in the ground last summer. Full sun, and it's probably has 1,000 berries on it. And I don't think I did anything else to this. I don't need to really prune it much. I'll remove the dead canes, so any of these canes that have berries on it, when this year is over, I'll just cut those canes out because they won't produce again. And other than that, I'll just basically leave it alone, water it occasionally, and that's it. These are some of my boysenberries here, and boysenberry is a very interesting and different fruit. It's very similar to a blackberry. It has less tartness than a blackberry and a little more towards the sweet profile. And they're vigorous growers. They grow similar to blackberries, but their shoots get more vine-like. So they're great plants. This one is only, I think, about a year or two old. And it's absolutely covered in boysenberries. So this is one I would definitely recommend. They can be propagated by ground layering. I haven't ever tried cuttings with these guys, but I have some of them out in full sun and some in some pretty shady areas, and I still get quite a few berries on them, even in the shaded spots. There's one, and I think I've only ever purchased 1 or 2 boysenberries and propagated them the same way you propagate blackberries, by letting them lay over, and then when they touch the ground, rooting them in dirt or a pot, or just where they are, they develop their own roots, and then you pull them out and up pot them. Even this one in the middle here, I gotta cut grass around it, but this one in the middle was just made by this one falling over. This is Taco right here. He's a happy little cat. He likes to be face pet, and he likes to bite sometimes. This is my Desert King fig tree, and it's probably around 4 years old in ground here. Had 0 dieback this winter, even though we hit 5 degrees. And it's loaded up with breba, which is what Desert King is for. And this one has about 100 breba on it. And it's one of the only trees I would grow just for breba. It won't produce any main crop figs here without the fig wasp like they have in parts of California. But it will produce an absolute ton of breba. And they will be ripened before any of the main crop figs will, in the June-July range, when most of my main crop trees don't even begin to ripen figs until August. So definitely an interesting tree to have. Any trees that get me to extend the season where I'm getting figs or other fruit are ones that I'm looking for. And Desert King extends it on the early end for sure. Right next to that Desert King is a Takoma Violet, which has done well for me in ground here, even though this is probably the least sunny part. We're getting sun right now, But that's the tree cover here. So we get about an hour or two of sun a day on these trees, and I still do get fruit off them, which is kind of amazing, and you wouldn't think that with fig trees. Both of these trees would be much more productive if they were in full sun, but this area of my yard does not have even part-day sun. It just has a couple hours of sunlight a day, and that is enough to get these guys to fruit. Now, anything in the shade like this most of the day will take longer to fruit, and it won't fruit as much as it would in full sun, but still just awesome to be able to be in the deep woods back here and under 80% tree cover and still get fruit. Like that Desert King with 100 fruit on it is right here in the shade next to it. And right around this time of day, there's a window of about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours where they both get light. Other than that, they're in full shade all day. Right next to the Desert King is one of my favorite trees, which is this Shangri-La Mulberry tree that is 15 plus feet tall and at least a dozen feet wide. It has these enormous dinner plate size leaves, which fig trees and mulberry trees will grow even bigger. Shangri-La normally has a big leaf, but if you put it in more shade, the leaves grow even bigger. And they have a really interesting look to them. They create a complete blanket. So if you're looking for something to create shade, you could cut out the area under it, and it would be a great shady spot. But if you're not looking for something that grows pretty vigorously, I don't know if I'd go with Shangri-La. Even with all that shade, look at all these beautiful berries on here. Shangri-La is starting to ripen in full force now. And this tree has been in ground for at least 4 years and survived a bunch of winters where we got down to 4 or 5 degrees, and it's producing fruit. And it had no dieback this year. In this winter where we hit probably below 30 for about a month, and we were at 4 or 5 degrees twice. So Shangri-La is one of my favorites. I can also root it by cutting, which is a huge benefit and a help. I don't have to graft these onto, I don't have to have a root stock to graft each one of these onto. I can root these as cuttings and grow them on their own roots. This is one of my smaller Glory de Sablons currants. It's in a 1 or 2 gallon container here. These are also, currants are also ones you can root from cuttings, so I do include them in my cutting sale in the winter. But they're just interesting plants. For such a small plant, that's got quite a bit of fruit on it. And the pink ones are really nice. This Glory de Sablons pink currant was one that was in the same size as the one in the smaller container from before, but I stuck it in ground last year, and I expect it to be significantly bigger by this time next year. This is a lot of my potted trees that I'm still in the process of getting set up on irrigation this year. I have to reset them up each year, and sometimes I maneuver them to different spots. So it's a lot of work, but I want to get it done sometime in the next couple weeks. Because there's a lot of trees to hand water, a couple hundred, mostly in anywhere from 3 gallon to 20 gallon containers. Lots of trees, lots of watering. That's why I would recommend drip irrigation for just about anybody with more than 10 trees. Still working on setting these rows up. It's going to take a while to get them all set for the year. But the plants are all out in the sun now, so that's when they start forming their fruit. The next stage is making sure that they get enough water that they don't start drooping. And that's with my drip irrigation. This is part of what I'm in the process of fixing on the drip irrigation. Every year at some point in the fall or the early spring, when I don't see where the plants are, I hit some of the drip irrigation spikes with the lawnmower or step on them and crunch them. So I go around with these things called goof plugs and fix any of the damage or holes, and then add on new drip spikes for where the plants are this year that I've moved. So this is definitely something that needs to be done soon because it's getting hot. But that's part of the drip irrigation maintenance. It's not supposed to be spraying that much out. That's supposed to be hooked up to a dripper that puts out basically like a drop a second, a little more than that. That's quite a bit more than the 2 or 4 gallons an hour it's supposed to put out. That's more like a gallon a minute. Here's a good example of why I tell people not to panic when it looks like their tree isn't coming back after a decent amount of winter cold and dieback. This yellow long neck was on the list of ones I made that might possibly be dead, but then a couple weeks later it's sprouting up plenty of growth from below soil level. And these ones that have a good root ball and grew well last year, even if they get a tremendous amount of dieback and dieback to ground level, they will grow vigorously the next year. They don't start off like they're starting as a new plant. They come out quickly. It looks like that now, and it'll be 12 inches tall in a week or two. And it'll be a big plant this year. It'll still be one that's at least shoulder height. It won't stay that height here. It's not permanently stunted or anything like that. It has to put all that energy in the root ball somewhere, and there's no growth up top, so it just forces it to grow like crazy. Violette De Bordeaux right here is one of the only figs in the older part of my orchard that took damage this winter. Even though we had such a cold winter, most of them took very little to no damage. Violette De Bordeaux, kind of in the same boat as Ronde de Bordeaux, where it tends to take a little more damage than some during the winter. Ronde de Bordeaux grows back really quickly afterwards. Violette de Bordeaux takes a little while. So it's not the most cold hardy variety, although a ripe Violette de Bordeaux fig is just surprisingly good. This one next to it here is Improved Celeste, and same winter conditions, same spot essentially, and this one took 0 damage. So gives you an idea of some of the cold hardiness between the two of them. Although Violette de Bordeaux's been there 4 years and it's still doing well. This tree that's already over 6 feet tall is a Tina fig, and this one is relatively old, and it had 0 dieback this winter. It even had unlignified branches that didn't dieback, which means branches that were still green and didn't harden off to that brown coloration. And I didn't know Tina was a hardy variety. I put it in ground expecting some dieback in this, 5-degree, very cold winter. But it started right from the top, right from some of the green buds on green wood, and kept growing this year. And that one surprised me. There weren't too many that got no dieback at all out in this orchard area where there's a good, where the sun faces it throughout most of the day. But this was one of them. This is an Annabelle hydrangea, which for the hydrangeas, one of the interesting features of it is that it is actually a native plant. It's called a smooth hydrangea. And the Annabelle variety has these white puffy flowers on it. And it blooms before most of the other ones. It blooms before my panicle hydrangeas, which also have giant big clusters of white flowers. So this is one I'm excited about. And I have also reproduced some of these as cuttings. Just an all-around cool plant. The fact that it's a native is a pretty awesome bonus. And that's a pretty plant for it being about 6 inches tall last year. That was really quick to get to that size and that sort of look. This is one of my panicle hydrangeas. I have quite a few of them, and they can get to be pretty big after a couple seasons. This one here, I train them partially as trees, so I limit the amount of growth coming out of the bottom so it's not a full bush. And you can do just about anything you want with the trimming and winter pruning of a panicle hydrangea, because it forms all of its new giant white flowers on the ends of the new growth. Whereas the big leaf hydrangeas, you have to be a little more careful with how you prune them. This plant is one of my willows. It's a scarlet curls willow. Has interesting, the bark on it is twisty and red. And it's an interesting plant to look at. And another one that I like to propagate by cutting. Just has really interesting shape to it. This is one of my Salavatsky pomegranates, and it's pushing out its first flower of the year. This one I planted in ground last spring, right around this time last spring, so it's been in ground for about a year. And even though this Salavatsky pomegranate is just a year old, it had no winter dieback. I did nothing to protect it. And at 4 degrees, it handled it well and had no problems, and it's already pushing a flower out this year. So this is one of the few pomegranate varieties I would recommend growing in Zone 7, like we are here in Maryland. This is one of my Salovatsky pomegranates that I actually have in a barrel style large container. I don't bring this one in the winter. I just bring a couple of the barrel style pots up against each other, and it still survives and does really well. It is a decent size. It's a couple years old now, and the Salovatsky pomegranates are so tough that I actually don't even protect the containers or the in-grounds at all, other than maybe just bringing the containers next to each other. But it's an interesting tree. This is an Adam's elderberry flower, and this plant is one that I grew, and it was a cutting last year, and this year it's already a little taller than me, so it's about 6 feet tall and producing these giant flowers. And some of the flower heads already have fallen off and are developing into elderberries. It's one of my favorite plants, definitely one of my favorite native plants too. Great for the wildlife, good for medicinal purposes. You can make different things out of elderberry. You just have to remember to cook the berries, and they're really good. They get this big quickly. This one I stuck in ground last spring, right around now. And it was just a little cutting that was about maybe 8 inches tall. The elderberry I have right next to it is Ranch, and it's similar, but they're all a little bit different. They have different growth patterns, their leaves look a little different, and they fruit a little bit differently. But they get such amazing heads of flowers. This one here is an apple rootstock I planted last year. And I planted the rootstock last year with the intention of grafting on it and didn't get to it. So this year I grafted 3 different varieties onto it. Fuji, Williams Pride, and then an unknown from a local orchard. Oh, that's a giant bumblebee. It's flying into the lens, trying to fly up my pants. Luckily those don't sting because I am allergic to bees, so I have to be quite a bit more careful than the average person with bees. But he flew right into the lens and tried to fly up my pants. So many different varieties out here. I grow over 200, probably closer to 250. And I'm hoping to have both fruit off of and pictures of at least 200 varieties this year. Because I don't like to add them to my cutting sale in the winter or plant sale in the spring until I've had fruit off them and gotten pictures of the fruit to confirm the variety and to taste it and to be able to have an opinion on it, basically. This is another one of the trees I'm excited about this year. Right in front there is Tia Pena, and it's probably my most vigorous tree, that and the cherry cordial right next to it on the right. It's not that old and it's already thicker than my arm at the trunk and covered in fruit. An idea of lots of little fruit buds all over it. This one seems to be doing better than it ever has before because it's out here in full sun in the orchard. And cherry cordial is another interesting one that grows like crazy. Both Tia Pena and cherry cordial grow like crazy and wilt as soon as you don't water them for 24 hours. So believe it or not, these got 1.5 inches of rain yesterday and they're already wilting. So these ones, I basically hook up multiple drip irrigation spikes too, because they need it. But they're huge. I'll just show a couple of the big leaves off. This one is a Zafiro here. Enormous leaves this year. This other one with huge leaves is YOLO Bypass. It's a California seedling, and it has absolutely enormous leaves with a cool pattern to them. Love the big leaf varieties. Let's see if I can put my hand in here for comparison. My hand is huge. This is Cascade. I'm not sure how you say that, but It must mean enormous leaf in a different language, because these leaves are huge. This one here is an undata, and undata has an enormous leaf at times. It can look kind of wilty sometimes, and sometimes it just puts out these enormous, beautiful leaves. Here, I'll give you an example. This is a normal size leaf, or a smaller leaf, and that's undata. Probably 15, 16 inch leaf.